Shalom, Rabbi, and thank you for taking the time for this conversation as part of my program, Profiles of Faith. We're here today on March 16, this 29th of Adar, with Rabbi Jeff Fox at Yeshivat Maharat in Riverdale in New York. Rabbi, how do you prefer to be called?
You can call me Jeff, that would be great.
Jeff. Rabbi Jeff?
Just Jeff is great.
Rabbi Jeff Fox, Rosh Yeshivat Maharat, is the first to courageously attend and graduate Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, which was established, like Maharat itself, by Rabbi Avi Weiss, the head of the Hebrew Institute at Riverdale, the Beit, in which Maharat is based, and where we are talking right now. Upon graduation, he served as rabbi of Kilat Kesher, a community synagogue in Tenafly and Englewood, for 7 years. In Rabbi Fox's tenure at Kesher, the community grew threefold, from 30 to nearly 100 families. During that time, Rabbi Fox also taught at Yeshivat Chovevei. He also served on the board of the Synagogue Leadership Initiative of UJA and NNJ. Rabbi Fox is a senior rabbinic fellow at Shalom Hartman Institute and has also been a member of the faculty at Drisha Institute, the Florence Nelton Adult Education School in Westchester, and Yeshivat Hadar. Rabbi, you gained great experience and a great hearty reputation at a young age. Can you tell us about your life, your family, where you grew up, and the major influences on your life?
Thank you very much, Sally. It's great to be here talking together. I grew up in New Rochelle, New York, not so far from where I live today. And I grew up in a traditionally observant, conservative Jewish home. And so by the time I came into my family, I'm the baby. I have two older brothers. My parents had already created a home that was Shomer Shabbat and Shomer Kashrut. And I had a very robust Jewish education, attending Solomon Schechter till 8th grade. Then I attended an Orthodox high school, Westchester Hebrew High School. And it was at Westchester Hebrew High School that I met, for the first time, a rabbi who, to me, seemed like he knew Kol HaTorah Kula. It was an inspiring teacher, Rabbi Shmuel Greenberg, who was also my Masada Kedushin. And in my parents' conservative synagogue, also Rabbi Mel Cerner was an important influence on my religious growth as well, in terms of being a rabbi who knew everybody in the room. Rabbi Cerner had a way of working the room at Kiddush, and he knew everybody's family, everybody's cousins, and what was going on in people's lives, and is truly an inspiration. And then as I grew more in my own religious journey, through high school and then spending time in yeshiva and shalavim, I encountered the vision of Rabbi Weiss, who really became my mentor in what it meant to build Jewish community. And those three rabbis, I would say, were the models for me of what it meant to be a Jewish religious leader.
Can you tell us, please, about yourself as a child in the context of Jewish life and learning and...
Sure. So when I was in 8th grade, I knew that I was going to be a rabbi. It was part of what my goal was. I was either going to be a rabbi or a professional chess player. I was very active and played competitive chess.
Is there a connection between rabbinic Judaism and chess?
I think there is a connection, and that's a whole set of shirim I could give, perhaps. But it definitely trained my mind to think Talmudically, to think more than one step ahead, try to understand where arguments are going and how they're developing. And at some point I had to make a choice between chess and Shabbat was more meaningful to me. And that part of my religious journey really became clear at some point in 8th grade. I thought I was going to be attending JTS. That was the path of my family. It would have made perfect sense. I met my wife in USY, the conservative movement's youth movement. We attended Camp Ramah. It was a really wonderful place to kind of grow in learning and in leadership. And then at some point over the arc of my high school career and then in yeshiva in Israel, it became clear to me that the Orthodox community was the right fit for my own life. It wasn't made on an ideological level. It wasn't because I came to a different place in my belief of Torah Misinai, but socially I fit in more in the Orthodox universe, and it felt like the home that I would want to build would be a part of the Orthodox world. And so after college, I went to Yeshiva University and started rabbinical school at YU.
Wow. So you're all over the place. Conservative, YU. Do your teachers in YU still talk to you now that you're on Maharat?
I talked to some of my colleagues at Yeshiva University, not so many of the people who were my Rebbeim. But when I came to Yeshivat Maharat, I did have a meeting with Rabbi Shmuel Greenberg, who was my high school Rebbe, who has a different view of the world than me. And what he said to me, which was very powerful, which was that even though he thinks this isn't the right thing for Klal Yisrael, he thinks it's the right thing for Jeff Fox. He understood what I needed, what was right for my neshama.
Interesting. We'll go back to that. I just want to go back to the chess. IBM made in the 1990s, I think,
Deep
Deep Blue, and it won Kasparov. It appeared it was actually a child's game compared to when they tried to do Jeopardy.
Uh-huh.
Do you know that?
Yeah.
So they made a system trying to play Jeopardy, and they failed miserably. Ultimately, they came to it, and the reason I'm mentioning it is because we have this left brain, right brain in Judaism of Talmudic learning, which is linear, but we also have a very Hasidic thing, which is very jumping all over the place and emotional and inspirational, and you can have shortcuts, and you can also, in general, in Judaism, you can atone for your mistake, which you cannot do in chess. So tell us about how you see this.
So I think chess is a very powerful analogy for religious growth. It grows in stages, in small little moves, and it requires having a vision of the next step and the next step after that, and 7 moves out and 8 moves out, and how each stage might develop one after the other. And in fact, it's the Hasidic masters who teach us that part of what you need is a dimayon, is an imagination of what your future could be, what the next move could be. How can you win with this piece in your hand? And what are you going to do when you only have a rook and a pawn? And what will that conclusion of the game look like? What will that ending combination possibly look like? And one of the things that I learned playing chess was the ability to think linearly, as you said. That's where the world of Talmud and Halacha, but also to imagine different possibilities. And part of what makes people today, the greatest players today, are the people who play surprising moves. So when Deep Blue was playing Kasparov, it was a huge victory for me because chess was on ESPN. And now all of a sudden chess was a sport. It wasn't just a game that you played at a board.
Bobby Fischer already brought it.
Made it more public. But now for my friends and I could say, see, chess is cool because it's on ESPN. But now the new players who are actually better than the Kasparovs and better than the Fischers, the way that they're able to beat the computers is play surprising moves that the computer don't anticipate.
But the one thing that I was going with it is that in chess, if you... it's basically a game of advantage and mistakes. Nobody wins in chess, people only lose in chess, right? So if you play somebody and has a queen and you don't have a queen, and if he doesn't make any mistake, most likely you're going to lose. But in Judaism, we say that even if you have a sword on your neck, remember the story of Chizkiyahu and Yeshayahu, he said, if I make kapara and atone even now, I can be forgiven for the worst possible sin ever. So that's why I'm going with it, that in Judaism, you have a way to recoup your losses.
So chess, it's true when you're playing chess in tournaments. There's no...
My interest in this is not for chess.
I know, but I think the analogy...
To have linear thinking out of the Judaism.
So I think it's true when you play chess in tournaments, there are no take-backs. But when you play chess with your friends,
yes,
and when you play chess with your kids, when you play chess with people you love, so you let them take back moves. So it's true in the tournament, and in some sense, in the dry world of halakha, there are no take-backs. People make mistakes, and they have real repercussions. But in the real world of family relations, and when I play with my boys, they always get to take back moves. They always get a chance to try again and to learn more and to...
So you're saying in real life, if you make a big mistake, like we see now some big famous people having to lose everything because of major mistakes they made, you're saying it's life-altering. You cannot go back.
Sometimes.
Well, it's a good aside. Going back to your childhood, when do you remember yourself feeling God independently for the first time? I'm not talking about class, lesson, parents. When did God stop being the Santa and became your friend?
That's a hard question.
Should be an inspiring question.
Yeah, it's an inspiring question.
I'm glad nobody asked you that.
I think that I started developing a personal relationship with Hashem later in my life through my own growth in tefillah. And I would say later in life, meaning in the last 5 or 7 years. And that was through an encounter with students of Reb Zalman Shalomi. I teach on the side, which isn't in my bio. I should put it on my bio. I teach once every 3 semesters or so at the Aleph Jewish Noble Rabbinical School. And that experience has exposed me to a very different way of imagining a really personal, intimate connection with Hashem.
You read the Davener?
Sure.
Well, I interviewed Rabbi Zalman Shlomi before in his niftar.
So I never met him. As he was I missed the very last chance to meet him, but sadly I wish I could have met him. So his students and his students, although they think I'm their teacher when I come to teach a class for them online, I have learned a tremendous amount about what a deep personal relationship with the creator of the world can look like in ways that were never developed in me throughout my other sort of more traditional modern Orthodox yeshiva education.
Amazing, and quite a surprising answer, because people usually come to connection with Hashem through their imagination, through their sense of reaching out to their mind. But for you, it's actually the mundane, daily thing of tefillah. Are you close with David Ingber?
Yeah, David is a good friend, so he and I have worked together on a bunch of projects. He's pushed me to think differently about tefillah as well. And I've come to now, in the last couple of years, even tefillah b'tzibur, which I think people have a hard time with in general, and I struggle with. When I don't daven in a minyan, I have a much harder time.
Really?
I find the power of the tzibur to be extraordinarily uplifting and inspiring, and sometimes the words can get difficult, and it's hard, and it's repetitive, I understand, but I find pieces to focus on, and I go more slowly. And
well, the evangelists mastered that. Do you think that we can have some of their lessons from our brothers
in the Christian world? I think
teach us how to do this, or even the African American churches. They have this. They have
an energy and a passion that's sorely lacking. One of the things that I think is deeply lacking in the modern Orthodox community is a kind of a passion that gets people to wake up early to get to davening. That's super exciting, and I love getting up to go to davening. When I can go daven super early in the morning with sunrise at nights, there's a certain power to that, and that kind of passion is missing in my community, in the modern Orthodox world, and that's sad, and it's hard to foster.
Rabbi, how would you define yourself? Are you Orthodox, modern Orthodox, or any other denomination?
So I guess the phrase that I use is modern Orthodox. Most people will put me into the open Orthodox camp, whatever that means. I'm not sure that open Orthodoxy exists.
Rabbi believes it does.
So Rabbi believes it certainly does. And I'm a Talmud of Rabbi in a very serious way. I think that his vision of the world is the way the Jewish community should operate. And so in terms of a handle to describe my beliefs, I think I would fit into the open Orthodox universe. I don't use that phrase not for anything personal. Modern Orthodox is what made sense to me in high school.
What is the difference between open Orthodoxy and renewal, New Age, and all the other words?
So there's a power to Jewish renewal, and that it's not a denomination, it's a way of thinking about the world.
So you're saying that renewal is a force, but open Orthodoxy is denomination. Is that?
Yeah, open Orthodoxy is still playing a denominational game, and there's a power to it, and I think Rabbi Weiss has a certain vision of how the world should work. I'm modern Orthodox, I'm Orthodox, but the denominational language, I don't think, is the future of Jewish life. Mm-hmm. I'm Orthodox, I'm Shomer Mitzvos, I'm a Yirei Hashem, I'm Shomer Torah Mitzvot, I love learning, I love halacha, and I'm Orthodox, but I don't know, that's not what defines me.
So I try to think with each person like one question that will be the most defining. And because you have had so many changes, and I didn't even know how many you had, so I want to ask you, what did you gain as a Jew and as a person, and what has changed, aside of knowledge, as a student after leaving Yeshiva High School, as a rabbi after leaving Chovavei, after completing 7 years as a pulpit rabbi, and after almost 10 years at Yeshivat Maharat? What did you leave each stage, and how has that changed?
So I think in high school, for me, Jewish life was very linear and chess-like, in the sense that I knew that my parents were wrong and I was right. Maybe part of my rebellion was becoming Orthodox.
You don't have to be Jewish for that. The parents are wrong, right?
Everybody knows that. I was fairly confident about the rules of the game, and then my parents were playing in the wrong game. It was a good game. It was just they had the wrong set of rules.
What was your vision of the game?
The irony is that when I was in USY, I used to run the minyanim that wouldn't permit women to be involved.
Wow.
I was running the traditional minyan, or the bli minyan, back in those days. I spent some time in Yeshivat Shalavim, again, sort of fortifying my understanding of the truth of the capital T. I went to SUNY Binghamton. After college, I was, I believe, the first and maybe the last student to go directly from Binghamton University into RIETS, Yeshivat Rabbeinu Yitzchak El-Haran Theological Seminary. I was at the rabbinical school at YU. I moved to Riverdale when I first got married in 1998. and I was in a fellowship here at the Bayit, here in the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale, together with Rabbi Weiss. And in the winter of that year, he put his arm around me and said, I'm starting a new Kollel rabbinical school program, and we need 2 students to start. And when Rabbi Weiss puts his arm around you and gives you a hug,
it's like the mob saying, I have an offer you cannot refuse.
An offer I couldn't refuse. So he recruited myself and my chavrusa then, Yaakov Simon, who now lives in Israel together with his family. And then I came to Chovevei and encountered a new world. I encountered Rabbi Weiss and I encountered Rabbi Linzer's sort of intellectual brilliance and openness, and what a different kind of Rosh Yeshiva could look like. A person who was engaged in all facets of Jewish life. When I was in YU, I had started a master's in Talmud.
You got your smicha from YU?
I did only in YU for a year, and then I was recruited at the first class of YCT.
So you say you went...
But I did a master's in Revel.
Uh-huh.
The Jewish Studies program.
Right.
So I was studying for a master's in Talmud, and many of my rebbeim at YU were sort of mocking academic studies of the Talmud. And then I came to Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, and Rabbi Linzer was studying with Rabbi Halivni at Columbia, and thinking seriously about what academic Talmud might look like. And all of a sudden I discovered a different kind of a brilliance.
Going a step back, when Rabbi Avi put his hand around you, you know, you can go to his home for a meal, you can hang out, but this was a major change. Didn't you think I'm going to get a smicha and nobody's going to hire me?
So, technically speaking, I'm still on a leave of absence from YU. I took a leave and I said I'm going to learn in this new kollel with Rabbi Dov Linzer, who had been at the Torah Mitzion kollel in Boca, was well known in the YU world and very well respected for his brilliance. And my dad actually said to me, are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you're going to get a job? He asked your question. And he actually had a conversation with Rabbi Weiss. You better make sure my son gets a job.
For those who do not know, a placement for rabbis, anybody can become a rabbi, but getting a job has to do with the school. So the school basically finds you 95% of the jobs.
Right, the school helps you find the job.
Helps you. It makes you find the job. Without the school, you are alone. So you left the placement system, meaning you gave up on your agent, and you said, I'm going to go it alone. What part of you didn't understand that you're going to be in the desert?
So I think that I was drawn to Rabbi Weiss's spiritual openness and Rabbi Linzer's intellectual openness. Rabbi Weiss did commit that he would help to find us jobs. There was no placement office. There was no system. And it was, in fact, Rabbi Dov Weiss, now Rabbi Dr. Dov Weiss, who knew somebody at Kesher, who made the connection and got me the job in Tenafly. And I was afraid, which is why I took a leave of absence. And for years, as a student in YCT, I used to get letters from the YU placement office, don't forget to show up for the first day of classes. And they sort of, at some point they figured out that I graduated and I'm no longer coming back. But for sure, the first year, nobody knew what was going to be. And then we got joined by 7 other students, and it seemed like YCT was actually going to happen, and this dream was going to become a reality.
You took a leap of faith. Speaking of faith.
I took a leap of faith that somehow Rabbi Weiss was going to figure out how to get us all jobs, and Baruch Hashem.
So now, back to my question. You changed, you took a chance, and when you graduated Chovevei, what did you take with you from there?
So when I graduated from Chovevei, Rabbi Weiss, Rabbi Linzer, together with Michelle Friedman, really trained us to imagine what a shul could look like. And when I came to Kesher, part of what I tried to do was build a shul that wasn't just a place for davening, which is important. That wasn't just a place for great shiurim, which are central, but a place where families can come and develop their lives religiously, spiritually, in every way possible.
But every rabbi says that. I've been to 100 shuls in my life, and every rabbi says, we have from Ktantan to learning, to family, to support. What is different in Chovevei's Ashkafa as synthesized through you that made this different?
So I'll give you 2 examples of programs that we initiated that were complicated in Bergen County, and that also made it clear to me that I needed to be in a different setting.
Well, if it's complicated, I know it's going to be your domain.
We decided to staff a homeless shelter that was meeting in a church. And I went to go talk to some of the other rabbis in the community to see, well, how come you guys haven't chosen to staff the homeless shelter? And everybody said, well, they want us to eat with the residents of the shelter. It's a family shelter, and we don't know how to get kosher food. And they want us to actually cook in the church. And this was complicated.
Well, we know. If there's any akum, this is it.
So we weren't in a church. We weren't in the church building. It's a separate facility physically. So I went and I met with the nun actually who was in charge, and I said to her, "Listen, here's the story. We want to staff the church, but we need to cook the food off-site, and there are health code issues. We had to work it all out, and eventually we did. And there were still members of the community who were pushing back. What do you mean? How can you staff a homeless shelter in a church? It was very scary to the community.
What does it mean, staff a homeless shelter?
So what that meant is that we served dinner, cleaned up dinner, helped kids who had homework issues, and then somebody had to sleep over. So there's a group of people who had to staff the homeless shelter.
We know that the goy cannot serve kosher food, but why couldn't you serve their food?
The rule that was given to whoever was the prior rabbi who asked was you have to cook on site, and therefore
you cannot serve somebody else's food. You
so
couldn't.
Because they also wanted us to eat with them. So they wanted us to be kosher food.
Oh,
so we
see.
needed to be kosher food.
See, okay.
So somebody needed to just take the time.
That's the vision of how a different communal thing. Still, many communities find their own pet project. I'm sorry to put it this way, but it's not transformative. It's just a project. So some people they send people to rebuild things in New Orleans, and some
Right.
people.
We also we sent a delegation to Houston after
Right,
Katrina.
but I'm saying integral to the everyday.
So I think part of the reason why I think that's paradigmatic is that there was real pushback.
I see.
There was pushback from my colleagues on the RCBC, the Rabbinical Council of Bergen County. There was pushback on the part of members, even of the Kesher community. There was pushback on the broader Englewood community.
So it helped you, being in Chodesh, it helped you deal with pushback.
It helped me understand that to me, it seemed obvious that this was the right thing to do. And now, by the way, it's become standard that many of the shuls in Bergen County are figured out, okay, on Christmas, we're going to staff the shelter because the other folks are going to go to church, or on Easter, or whatever it might be. And it's become a part of the community's fabric.
It's wonderful. So all the different religious in every town or thing can have this panacea of working together one day. Not only in crisis, but
Correct.
every day.
And then another program that I started in the shul was a women's tefillah group. Again, you can draw the line from there to where I am today.
We're going to get to it.
Which we'll get there. So a women's tefillah group in 2004, 2005 was still a little bit controversial, particularly in Bergen County. The George Washington Bridge is kind of an iron curtain from Riverdale to New Jersey. But there was real fear. And I actually needed colleagues on the RCBC to protect me. I almost got thrown off the RCBC for doing a women's prayer group. And it was a women's prayer group taking place off-site, not in the main sanctuary, in someone's home as part of the shul.
Right.
And there was a real sense of fear on the part of the rabbinic leadership.
So fear is something important to me to deal with because it is the most anti-faith element I can ever imagine. Because we hear the fear is a holdback or pushback, and I think, but if you're doing the right thing, aren't you serving God? And shouldn't it be God will take care of it, sort of? I mean, isn't doing the right thing enough? Why do we have to fear?
The fear of the slippery slope. Who knows the fear of the unknown. We're all afraid of the unknown. Part of what I think the vision of Rabbi Weiss is to allow us to not get...
Well, we know that Rabbi Weiss, that fear never...
Right, not get stuck in that fear and to be able to push through.
So after you completed your Chovevei, you went to be a rabbi, and then 7 good years ended, and you left. And what did you take with that from that?
So when I came to Yeshivat Maharat, part of the experience that I had there, in addition to the standard pulpit work, gave me experience to sort of be involved in the life of Psak Halacha in a way that very often the typical Rosh Yeshiva doesn't have that exposure.
Psak Halacha means that you are going to make the rules.
Well, I wouldn't say it in a harsh way like that. That's the chess model. I would say responding to the needs of a community. Meaning, so we're 2 weeks away from Pesach. We'll talk about that in a bit. And all of a sudden, I was getting asked, dozens of questions about the specifics of details of koshering, and people had different sets of needs. And in 2008, when there were families who couldn't pay their mortgages, there were families who need to figure out, I can't afford the Pesach that I afforded last year.
So that was what you took from pulpit rabbi, having to deal with the social
reality of the
reality.
pulpit and the pastoral reality of the pulpit
Amazing.
was extremely influential in the way that I think about halacha.
The hardest thing that I think when I think of a rabbi is that any given day, well, the simchas you know in advance. You know, you have a bris, which can happen surprise, but you have 8 days to prepare for that. You have weddings, you have bar mitzvahs, but unfortunately a loss can happen any day, and you can go from a bris in the morning to the graveyard 2 hours later, and that is...
The rabbinic roller coaster is powerful, and those ups and downs can both be challenging and exhausting, and sometimes exhilarating.
Yeah.
To go from a bris to a bar mitzvah to a levaya to a shiva, that's what life is. Life is about that emotional roller coaster. Those life cycles are what give meaning. Those emotional connections that you have in those moments can't be recreated. One of the pieces that I miss from the rabbinate is the opportunity to engage with people and connect with those moments of openness. I get a chance to do weddings of my students sometimes, and sometimes Lo Aleinu funerals.
But you can fall asleep at the podium, and you know.
But it's different in yeshiva.
And after this and Yeshivat Maharat, where do you find yourself now, having all these years, another good 7+ years?
So now here, after another 7+ years, 10 years here, almost 10 years here, I think part of what I've learned is that the human input into the process of the halachic growth is extraordinarily powerful, both in terms of human need, somebody who now can't afford to pay the mortgage, how are they going to make Pesach, both in terms of that experience, the personal, pastoral, psychological experience, and also the experience of great poskim. That is to say, how Rav Moshe responded to the sexual revolution in America, impacted his psak halacha in very real ways.
So you're on the front line, on the cutting edge, on the editing room of Jewish life.
Yeah, sometimes Yeshivat Maharat lives on the cutting edge, although I will say
sometimes I thought all the time.
So the reality is that day to day, most of what I teach is normative halacha.
Thank you for that. As they say, you got the call. Rabbi Avi put his hand again on your shoulder and said what? What did he say to make you come to Maharat? And you were a successful pulpit rabbi. What made you decide to give it all up and come to this risky? You like risk, don't you?
So I like to work in startup organizations. I've discovered about myself. So this is really now less Rav Avi and more Rabbi Sarah, who is a friend and a colleague, and who we work together very closely in Yeshivat Maharat. She said, can you want to come and give a model shiur as you're leaving the shul? Maybe you can pull this off. We need somebody who can both teach halacha at a certain level and has experience in psak.
So just the background, she is the co-founder of Maharat with Rabbi Avi, right?
Correct. Rabbi Sarah Hurwitz founded Yeshivat Maharat together with Rabbi Weiss.
She's the
first ordained woman, yeah. Who you should interview, by the way.
Of course, because I'm now on the arc from Berman, Blugenberg,
right? So
and I'm upwards, Jeff, to Sarah Horowitz, right?
So she's great. Part of kind of our shared vision of the yeshiva was that it wouldn't be just the chess metaphor of halacha, but also halacha that's responsive to human need in a real way. And that was only possible from somebody who had pulpit experience. People often ask, why is there a man who's the Rosh Yeshiva of a women's yeshiva? And at some point, I used to quip with my students, and I mean it only half tongue-in-cheek. At some point, one of my students will put me out of business. And that'll be the real success of the yeshiva. You
could have said, until there are enough women rabbis, you have to have a rabbi, right? Which
right.
Is,
you still have to have a man.
Unfortunately, it's men's, right?
Until now, that's the case, yeah.
So tell us how it started and the work that you do here and how it differs with other institutions and what are your goals?
So the work that I do at Yeshivat Maharat is on a day-to-day basis teaching normative halacha. The halacha curriculum here is modeled on what I learned at Yeshivat Chovei Torah. I still do lean on my Rabbi and Rabbi Linzer in thinking about how to structure the curriculum. So my day-to-day doesn't look very different from another Rosh Yeshiva at Yeshivat Chovei Torah or at Yeshiva University.
What does the Yeshivat Maharat different in its teaching, not philosophy, but everyday teaching from, let's say, the next door yeshiva.
So I think part of what makes a difference, again, is responding to the human need. Part of what makes it different is that it's a group of women who are learning at a high level, which may have actually never happened before in Jewish history, meaning that is in itself a revolution. There were great teachers before who created institutions of higher learning for women, Rabbi David Silbertz at Drisha, Rabbi Chaim Bravender in Israel, Rabbi Riskin.
We have Pardes, we have Drisha, we have Adar, we have few places, right? Each one focusing on
Each one doing their own thing. And that explosion happened since the 1970s, since the Rav Shir at Stern. You can go further back to Sarah Schneier, but at some point in the early 70s, women started learning for the first time advanced Jewish text, Gemara, Halacha. That revolution in and of itself makes Yeshivat Maharat different. And I think part of what makes the yeshiva's approach different is in an attempt to really integrate what we call pastoral Torah together with the halacha curriculum. It doesn't always work. We do our best to try to bring the human, psycho-spiritual side of religious growth in conversation with halachic development together.
So we met a couple of years ago, and then I think you ordained about 8 women. And I said to you then that I have a problem with the numbers. And by now you have ordained about 20?
About 19, 20, yeah.
And where have these graduates gone? Are these numbers going to grow faster? And how do you see them impacting the goals that you have set?
So there are currently 27 women studying for smicha. So the yeshiva has grown substantially since the last time we spoke. So the numbers are continuing to grow. The graduates currently are mostly working in synagogue settings. They're mostly working in large modern Orthodox synagogues.
As what?
So they're working as assistant rabbis with other titles. So the question of title always becomes complicated. And the policy of the yeshiva is that we grant smicha and don't grant a title.
That's interesting, but it's like going to accounting school and you learn accounting, but you're not going to be called an accountant.
So it's like going to accounting school. You get a CPA, but you get called. Most accountants get called by their first name.
But rabbis are called.
Typically, rabbis are called rabbi. That is true.
And the judge is called Your Honor, right?
So we made a decision at some point that the question of title became so divisive that it no longer became productive. And so the students have been negotiating in different communities that have different titles. So some are Rabbi, some are Maharat. There was a Moratenu. There's one who goes by Rabbi. And it seems like they're going to coalesce around Rabbanit, but one still never knows where it could end up. One of the things that I sometimes joke about, but mean seriously with my students, is that there's some questions that I can't answer. There's some questions that they have that I can't answer that they have to figure out. So when we talk about the fear of the slippery slope, I don't mind going down the slippery slope as long as we go down and we know what's at the other end. And we can go down there in an organized fashion and together figure out what are those next steps going to be? What is it going to be 8 moves away? So we don't have solutions to all the questions of ha'isha v'halacha, of gender and Jewish law, but the questions are really important, and some of that discourse will shift as women enter into the conversation.
There's one quote by Churchill that is very favorite of mine, and I think it comes very often, it's very relevant. He said, "Fear is reaction, courage is a decision." And so when you talk about knowing what's at the end of the slippery slope, that's a delusion. You never know what's at the end of the slippery slope. But what we do know from our history is that those who took brave, bold chances for the right reasons have done important work. But as we say, how do you know who is a false prophet from a true prophet? There are criteria. If you do the right thing, you don't need to know what's going to be at the end, right? So you don't know what's at the end of the slippery slope.
We don't know what's at the end of the slippery slope. And I think that some of it is a test of time. Yeah. We'll have to see when we're 120 what happens. But my sense is that when you meet and speak to the students and graduates of Yeshivat Maharat, you're talking to women who want to do Avodat HaKodesh, want to serve the Jewish people, want to teach Torah. And it therefore feels like courage in the right way.
So I want to talk about the elephant in the room. Studying Chovevei and studying Maharat, it all responding to a need. But the need used to be addressed by the bastion of modern Orthodox in America, which was YU, Yeshiva University. But it has turned to the right over the years, and it was the only game in town, and as such, it left many today at the center of modern orthodoxy, looking for a solution to their sense of disenfranchisement, feeling that Judaism was hijacked by the right wing. This summary may sound somewhat controversial, because it suggests that there are opposing sides, but can you please tell us about how you see this progression and change and modern orthodoxy changing and needing, fighting for the center?
So no community, no person, no family wants to change. Change only happens because there is a need, and the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of the change. And that reality is true in every setting in life. Change is hard. And when change comes in response to a need, then it is productive, and then it's courage. And that was the founding of Yeshivat Chovevei Torah. And at some level, that was the founding of Yeshivat Maharat. There was a need. There are women who are there and prepared and ready to serve. And our community needs them. There is no question in my mind that there are large swaths of the modern Orthodox community that are pining for a female religious leader. Whether that's young girls or adults or boys or men, the reality is that women and men are different. Our tradition teaches that, our Masorah teaches us that, biology teaches us that, and therefore women and men lead differently from each other. And there are some communities that need a man at his helm, and there are some communities that will need a woman at their helm, and there are some communities that will want both, trying to figure out how to create a model of shared leadership. And those communities that need and want what Yeshivat Maharat has to offer, I think will really benefit from the graduates. And I want to say something that's a little more pluralistic for a moment, which is that there are going to be Orthodox communities that will not benefit from a woman standing up in front of their shul on Shabbos morning and giving a drasha. And those communities shouldn't be calling the placement office of Yeshivat Maharat. Someday maybe they will. Everyone will call because they'll need a woman. But at the end of the day, there are some communities that are happy with having men in the positions of leadership, with all of the limitations that comes with. I believe deeply that there are large swaths of the modern Orthodox world that are deeply in desire and in need of a different voice. And that's what women have to offer.
It leads me to the next question, which is, Rabbi, can you please tell us the case for the Jewish woman? Her role in Jewish life as a private person, as a Torah scholar, which I understand is controversial, and now as a clergy. And why is she, the woman, the Jewish woman, on the front line of Jewish debate, especially when the front line, I understand, is assimilation?
So I can't define the Jewish woman.
So the case for the Jewish woman, we got away from women having no property, not having no dat, not being able to think without a husband or a father or men, and the men could have more than one wife, but we still have issues now of agunot. And tell us about how the case of the Jewish woman fits into this evolution and the struggle, and if Jews see that the Jewish woman's role has changed, why do they object to other changes? And we know that Rashi taught Torah to their children, to his daughters, and we know that the Rambam didn't. So we have this tension in history, but there is a direction.
Yeah, there's clearly sort of an arc, starting perhaps with Sarah Schneier in the 19-teens and the creating of the Beis Yaakov system, and the Rav in Boston and the Rav in Stern and David Silber and Chaim Bravender and Nishmat and Rabbanit Henkin. There's clearly an arc in which, in the Orthodox community, women have been gaining more and more access and becoming part of the halachic discourse and part of the leadership team of many different communities. That is the way history is going. So at some fundamental level, the arc of history is on our side, and if we could just hang in there, then we will definitely succeed. And will having women in religious leadership solve the problems of assimilation? I think what we need is good rabbinic leaders, men and women, and that's what will help ultimately solve the challenges and the ills of the Jewish world. And those people who still live in a universe in which women can't stand up in public aren't going to benefit from us, aren't going to benefit from 50% of the leadership of our world. But we live in the 21st century, and there is a growth of the woman's voice in ways that offers new insights into Torah. Not just, so to speak, into the parts of Torah like Hilchot Nidah, or questions of Agunah, or questions of head covering for women, but also in Hilchot Shabbat and Hilchot Kashrut. A woman's voice will, in fundamental ways, bring a fresh, new insight into how halacha ought to be functioning in the lives of the Jewish people.
I think what inspired me the most is not only talking about women's issues, but you are with Daniel and others at the Hartman Institute, and one of Daniel's big call for action is that the young generation responds to sincerity, but also to consistency and honesty, and that you cannot disenfranchise half the population and have young people believe that it's still a cause that you should belong to. So I think doing the right thing is a big issue that can fight assimilation when the young people say, I don't want to have anything to do with this old religion that condemns people like the Muslims and others. And I think that's the biggest argument.
So I think to maybe push where you're going, and thinking about Pesach a little bit, when we sit at our Seder tables, that's one of the few times when very often all the different parts of the Jewish community sit down, sometimes even at the very same table. We invite all of the pieces of our family, even the pieces of the family that maybe don't observe halacha in the same way. And the goal is to bring all the pieces of our identity to the table, whether that's our religious identity, our political identity, our sexual identity.
Except the chametz.
Except our chametz. The chametz we leave out. And I think part of what you're pushing at and getting at, which is essential, is that people want to be complete human beings. They want to be able to bring who they are to the table, be honest about who they are, and not have to hide pieces of their deeply held beliefs, whether that's about the minority voices in our world, whether that's about people who have been the subjects of prejudice for many years in our own community.
But I think that we know where we're going with it. We're both in agreement, but we have to answer the other voice, which would say, yes, but we have halacha, we have din, we have things in the Torah, we have thousands of Tanaim, Rishonim, Amoraim, and past who decided what women's role is. How would you answer them?
So even if you go back to the Tanaim and the Amoraim, they were also concerned about the role of women. They understood that Mishum Nachat Ruach Lanashim, that a woman's spiritual success was also a halachic value. And I think what often is important to me is that if you look at the values that Chazal chose of Hashem, that they thought should drive the Jewish world, so Chazal say, Mahu rachu mafatarachu, Mahu chanun afatachanu. Just like God is merciful and compassionate, so should each of us be. But they're making a choice. They could have said, Mahu kelkana, just like God is a violent, revengeful God, jealous God, so too afatah kelkana. But that wasn't what Chazal chose.
Well, but most Jews who go that, the zealots, are going with the Elkanah.
So I'm a rabbinic Jew. I think that Chazal's choice of Mahu Rachum, that we're supposed to be compassionate human beings. Nacharu Nashim is a rabbinic value. And none of these values are driven by, exclusively by 21st century popular, terrifying, postmodern values. They're driven by Mahurachum afatarachum, and feminism is a real value that I think is embedded in the halachic tradition in fundamental ways.
Back to this old influence on our discussion here, is it fair to say that if not for the Enlightenment movement in Germany during the 19th century, which led Rabbi Moshe Sofer, the Chatam Sofer, to devote his life to fight secularism, and women's role in Jewish modern life would have been different? All modern orthodoxy would have looked different. He's the one who stated, Chadash Asur min Torah, innovation is biblically forbidden. And it's circumstantially what happened once that we are looking back as the pivotal turn.
Right, the irony about the Chatam Sofer is that he was doing something radically new. he was the innovator of Chadash Asur Min HaTorah, which should be Asur Min HaTorah. Meaning, there's no such notion of Chadash. It's a Mishnah about grain and growing outside of the land of Israel, or growing inside the land of Israel. But the notion that new ideas are foreign to Jewish life is just itself anathema and foreign to Jewish life. And it's interesting, if you look at the Sephardi response to the same questions, it's much different. Rav Ovadia, who's not a feminist by any stretch of the, is not as afraid of the Enlightenment, of Reformed Jews, in fact, because he's just using the texts of halakha. And so he might be okay with women reading Megillah because he's not afraid. He doesn't have that fear that can so cripple so many poskim.
Talking about arguing, there is a drive to silence arguing because it sounds like disagreement. But in Jewish life, we're not afraid of tension or argument. It's okay. It is the foundation of who we are. Abraham bargained with God, Moses argued with him, the Talmud is based on debate, and now we have misgivings about it. I think diversity in debate has always propelled us forward. We can do anything if we just argue enough about it, but it takes time. So you are here as an agent in that struggle, but try to argue the case for arguing.
So I think argument and debate and milchamta shel Torah is of an important value when it comes from a place of respect. I can disagree with my teachers and I can push back because I respect them, and I can disagree with colleagues. But when it turns from debating about a text or debating about a value or debating about an idea to ad hominem attacks, I feel very uncomfortable. And so I try very hard on Facebook, for example, to not engage in that kind of just angry discourse, which is, I think, often I'm the recipient of that kind of discourse, but I simply ignore it to the best of my ability because I'd rather engage on the level of ideas, of texts, of what will actually help people instead of who is orthodox and who is not orthodox. Change happens one step at a time. And there are machlokot haposkim that are very powerful and important about really big issues, about questions like the definition of life, the definition of death. There are major machlokot.
But machloket is good.
And that's what moves the community forward.
What is the couple, the most famous couple in the Talmud? It's Shammai and Hillel, right? Why are they the paradigm of conversation in the Torah?
Because they're debaters.
But they're also married within each other,
Married to
right?
the family, yeah.
Meaning that the paradigm is to argue, but to still go and have a drink together.
Here's an interesting idea. The Mishnah is a code of Jewish law.
Right.
The Talmud is an undoing of the code of Jewish law.
It's humanizing.
Because the Talmud says, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who do you think you are to codify? You left out all this other material. We're going to bring all this other material from the Tanaim. The same thing happened, by the way, in the 16th century. Rabbi Yosef Karo, Moshe Isserles wrote the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch, and then the subsequent commentator said, who do you guys think you are to codify? And they brought in a whole slew of other information. So there is always a process of an attempt at codification and then an undermining of codification in the next generation.
So since you skipped the Rambam, I'm going to go to him, and I assume that we finished talking about the big question. We can go to a simple theology.
Sure.
Maimonides, he distinguishes between true beliefs, meant to bring man to his higher perfection, and necessary beliefs useful for the proper functioning of society. So the question is, if we can sort of see behind the curtain the wizards doing, and we understand this distinction between true beliefs and necessary beliefs, can we still honor all halacha as a guide for perfection?
So how do you make sure that in the maintenance and the management you don't lose the majesty?
And in the majesty, you don't lose the maintenance.
You don't lose the maintenance. So the question in a deep way is...
I liked your question because the phrasing it, I want to steal it.
Okay.
So tell us how you phrase it again.
So how do you, within the maintenance and the management, not lose the majesty?
The maintenance, you mean the social order.
Yeah.
And the majesty is the higher perfection. Right.
This is something we think about a lot in yeshivas. How do we work with the details of halakha? Try to build a system that makes sense so that when you come into shul on Friday night and you're davening Kabbalat Shabbat, it can be uplifting. And you went through a whole series of details of of the light in your fridge and how you're going to make tea and all of the very specific details, how do all of those fit into a broad system? So I will say that 95%, maybe even 98% of the time, I can make the details make sense. There are going to be instances in which the details, the observance of the details is about submitting to a system. The problem is when the submission to a system leads to ethical conflicts. So you've mentioned aguna. So what happens when the system itself has designed a relationship between husband and wife that is fundamentally imbalanced? That's where I'm concerned. I can work with the details of bishul on Shabbat, of how you're going to get your food to be warm on Saturday for lunch. I can work even with Psukei de Zimra and figure out how to choose the pieces of davening that are going to be meaningful so that when you get to Shema and the Amidah, it can still be majestic. Where I feel the rub is when I encounter deep ethical failings. And what do I do then? And again, I want to be clear, that's a small percentage of the time. But those things are deeply troubling. Aguna, when a couple can't have, is unable to get pregnant because the observance of a Hilchot Nidah does not match her body's cycle.
Or when a husband is supposed to divorce a wife because she didn't bring him children.
Or when a husband is supposed to divorce his wife, but won't give the get because he's a jerk.
Right.
And we can't beat him up anymore.
So I thought you were going to go to a different place before, which I prepared a different question, which is what happens when the maintenance becomes the main issue and we forget the inspiration. And I'll quote Maimonides again. So he redefines idolatry as pertaining to the internal rather than external, meaning that rather than combating the gods of the nations of the world, we have to combat the idolatry way in which we treat our own deity. Mm-hmm. When the service becomes everything, maintenance becomes everything, and we forget.
And we totally lose the majesty.
The majesty. But I will get back to
that. When halacha itself becomes avodah zarah.
Right, so I think that's where we are that's our strong side when we battle the Haredi world, right?
Right, so I don't engage in those battles. I don't feel like a need to respond to that universe.
But it's part of the game. Look, in the games of sport, we have concussions issues in the NFL.
That's why the NFL is usher.
NFL's usher?
You can't. I boycotted the Super Bowl this year. My kids were not happy. When my wife and I went to the movies, you should no longer watch the NFL. It's going to be usher. In 15 years, we're going to look back.
Can you watch the advertisement, though?
That's my usher for different reasons. But the NFL, I really believe this. The NFL, 15 years, we're going to look back and say, it's gladiators. They're killing each other. Don't watch the Super Bowl.
Well, are you going to wear leather shoes?
Okay, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Well...
So I don't feel a need to change the Haredi world. The Haredi world, except when there are people who are experiencing abuse and have no way out. No, those people I want to help.
I'm not talking about the Haredi world. I'm talking about a student like you who hears conflicting information. So the Haredim or the parents are listening to their favorite shir, and then they become Chassid of a certain Rav, and that Rav says one thing, and then they come to yeshiva, and the Rav says another thing, and you want to be a voice in that conversation that shifts the needle from maintenance to inspiration, from nonsense to ikar, from tafel to ikar, from mistakes and things that are going to drive people away to doing the right thing.
So I'll answer that in two different ways. Let me answer it personally, spiritually. I love the details of halakha. That's what I spend my life on day to day. And I know that for most people, it's really boring. But when I can sit down and learn one seif of the Shulchan Aruch and understand where it came from all the way back to the Mishnah and where it's going in the 21st century, I feel Yad Hashem in a very deep way. That's the best it gets, is being able to sort of live with these books. And for the vast majority of the Jewish people, 95%, 90% at least, those details are boring and are basically irrelevant.
Obstacle.
And they're getting in the way of the majesty. I get it. So part of what we try to work on is, okay, here are the details. What's the deeper meaning? What's the reason that there's so much ink spilled about how to eat warm food on Shabbat? Why does that even matter? Why does Kadosh Baruch Hu care whether or not I turn off the lights in my fridge on Friday afternoon? Does that even enter into God's realm of thought? So the way I sometimes ask the question is, does God really care if I rip the toilet paper? So I think the answer to that question is, God cares that I think about whether or not I rip the toilet paper.
As Shmuel Golden said, God may not care, but He cares that I care.
That's a good way to put it. God cares that, because now all of a sudden, when I put the tissue box in the bathroom in Erev Shabbos, that's like a meaningful act.
And also, what I found is that all of this attention to detail trains us to be more considerate human beings. Because in the world, we come across a lot of things that make us do what we think we want to do. So how do you avoid hurting somebody or doing the wrong thing or putting something in your pocket when nobody's looking? It is because you are trained to think morally and halachically and ethically, and I think that attention to detail shapes us.
The attention to detail can shape us, and it also sometimes people use it and abuse it, and then use it to cheat the government in terms of not filling out their taxes or whatever it is. So you have to be careful with sometimes how people use those details.
Going back to that now, which you brought, and we're playing this ping pong here. So, restating the issues, Judaism is, in my opinion, an evolving religion, and I want to hear how you see it. But for many, it appears frozen and unchanging. For instance, women's role in Jewish life. Understandingly, this topic is close to your heart, hence Maharat. But there are so many other examples. The Aguna, second day of Yantov, Kitniyot, other innovations for which we build fences upon fences, which keeps many more out than in, and it reinforces a fear of change. So how does modern Orthodox Jewish life navigate this theological maze, and does it make sense to be so bold on one front while dropping the ball on others?
So the way that I think about the issues that I want to push on are where I feel an ethical conflict. So I often talk about it with the students, that the spectrum is, how do you make your tea on Shabbat as opposed to aguna on the other end? So, are you a big tea drinker?
Yes.
So, even if you love tea and you want to have high tea with the queen, I'm not ethically invested in your having tea on Shabbat. I could find a way, but I'm not really ethically invested in your tea. If a woman is an aguna, a couple can't get pregnant. I'm ethically invested in a certain outcome of how I'm going to respond to that issue.
So I want to interrupt you here for a reason. Who are you to decide what is Ikar and Tafel in the Torah?
So I think all of it is important. There's a difference between something in which people are suffering, something in which people aren't suffering. So I don't think people suffer because they can't have tea on Shabbat.
I see. So you're saying one of the forces of change is responding to human needs, and Judaism is all about responding to human needs and not crushing it. And there are things that help us regulate.
And Chazal even say, Mishum iguna ikilu be'rabanan, meaning Chazal built into the system, there are certain areas where we're supposed to try to help the woman whose husband in their mind was lost somehow.
So how come we're not changing that? We no slavery, no women can have property. We said that not multiple wives, and yet aguna we cannot change. Is it the crisis of leadership, or is it the problem halacha?
I think aguna is a crisis of leadership. But there are great rabbis like Rabbi Simcha Kraus, the International Beit Din, who are really working on it.
The Rav was supposed to have solved it, and then he backed off because
there's pressure from the right, because there's too much fear. Even Rabbi Kraus, whose credentials are very difficult to question, so the right wing pushed back, and he's doing it quietly, and he'll continue to work on individual cases po v'sham, but every time he tries to go public with it, he gets beaten up. So one of the ways that things happen is, little by little, he's going to write a tshuva here and a tshuva there, and then he'll put together, and that's part of what I do as well, is I answer individual questions po v'sham, and then it becomes something bigger.
This leads me to questions about halacha. So Jewish law gets its authority from a mixture of the Oraita, attributed to Torah. There's rabbinic edicts, and there are lots of rabbinic edicts we call takanot, right? And we have minhag Israel, which is what people have done over the century. And Judaism is a balance, juggling balance of those three things, and we have hierarchy. The Oraita is 10 points, rabbinic is 4 points, and minhag is 6 points, right? It's like a chess going the values of a king, a
the
queen,
pieces, right?
Pieces, right? So tell us more about how you see that. And
So you sort of outlined 3 categories, and I want to add in a 4th. There's the Oraita, Torah laws, the Rabbanan, rabbinic laws, minhag, practice, and then there's what I would call nohag. Nohag is things that Jews do.
How is it different from minhag?
So, for example, when somebody does Hagba in shul, everybody lifts up their hands and says V'zot HaTorah, and almost everybody uses their pinky. You don't use your pointer.
Right.
Somehow that's like lo na'im to point.
A lot of people do both.
People do this. So V'zot HaTorah.
I always thought it's like.
I don't know what this is. So this.
It's an ox. And I thought about the egel.
Okay, so that's the wrong Torah.
Well, using the egel for the Torah.
Oh, dafka.
It's like dafka. We're using. I heard anyway.
So the nohag is things that Jews do that doesn't have binding force. Meaning, if I'm in shul and they lift up the Torah, V'zot HaTorah, and I don't lift up my hand and point, or I point with my finger instead of my pinky, I haven't violated anything. Another example of that is middle of benching. V'al shulchan zeh shalchan olav, we bang on the table.
Right.
Has no binding force.
Also, l'chaim.
L'chaim, bari priyaga, savri l'chaim. There's no. Lots of Jews do it. There's no binding force at all. So
Rituals.
it's a. I don't know how to use. I don't know what the good English word is. It's not a minhag. It's not a.
Kissing the four tzitziot.
Kissing your tzitzis is a good thing. So a minhag is a practice that has binding force. A nohag is a thing that Jews do. And that's where something like kitniot comes in. Kitniot is a minhag that has binding force, but it's a minhag based on an error. So on the one hand, the level of authority is very limited. On the other hand, I'm not ethically invested in having beans and rice on Pesach. So where does it matter? It matters in Israel, where it really becomes divisive. In Israel, when you, Baruch Hashem, have intermarriage between Ashkenazim and Sfardim, now all of a sudden I can't eat at my Mechatenim's home. Now all of a sudden kitniot becomes an ethical issue. And there I might be invested in saying, okay, for a family with that kind of thing, so they should rely on the minhag that allows the consumption of kitniot. In America, you go to a hotel or you eat in your home, you go to the normal supermarket, you don't have to eat kitniot, it's okay, you'll survive without your hummus for 8 days.
So for the record, I sent you an email asking you about kitniot. And I should have asked you also about second day of Yantar. But I think that, and I sent you the answer of
Rabbi Galinkin.
And I thought that there is an element there which we overlook. And I want to argue it in public. Because arguing is Torah.
It's good.
2 of his arguments were that if we do repeat something that is in error, and we know that Jewish law, like all law, is based on precedents, then we're actually giving a precedent of doing something based on an error. So that's one issue. The second thing is that if we're doing something on an error, somebody can say, I don't follow an error, so I don't follow halacha, and then I won't follow other halacha because I think it's an error.
Right.
So I think an integral part of halacha should also be how true it is. We cannot say it's minhag Israel and ignore if it's right or wrong. So it's like saying we're playing NFL because we played it concussion, but we played it for 100 years. This is how it's played.
Right.
You cannot not watch the Super Bowl and honor kitniot. I think it's inconsistent.
So I think
you now.
Now I'm in trouble. So I think that part of the idea is that, particularly around Pesach, many of the practices that I would call nohag that have seeped into Pesach are treated with binding force, even though perhaps they shouldn't have binding force. Meaning, so I will often tell people who are vegans that if you really need to eat something to get protein, you should probably be eating beans on Pesach. I think that's a reasonable psak.
You don't answer my question. It's based on an error, and we don't include errors. And the argument that we've done it for hundreds of years is not different than NFL having played for 100 years, and it's based on something wrong. There are concussions. So answer about the error being part. You're saying that we have to pull the chametz out. This is an error. It's a chametz.
So I guess the reality is that if you look in, I mean, I don't know how technically you want to get, but if you buy a bag of rice and actually search through it, you will sometimes still today find kernels of wheat in there.
But it's batal b'shishim.
Yeah, but
you
it's
can find kernel of something in the other.
So, but if you cook it with water, all of a sudden you have mamish chametz in your pot. So there is still a reality. Even people who are eating kitniyot, they have to still check their rice. So it's not a far-fetched error. I understand that it's in its origin was problematic, but silos are not super clean. There's wheat everywhere. There's chametz everywhere. Possibly.
I'd like to ask this question. The Rav says that the study of Torah is an act of surrender. Do you agree with him, and can you elaborate on it, especially when we encourage students to ask questions and argue? So if we surrender, we don't ask questions, we don't argue. Mm-hmm. If we argue, we don't surrender. How do you balance the two, emotion and argument?
So I think the study of Torah needs to be surrender at some stage, but that the goal is to get beyond that. Meaning, as a student, even starting in smicha with a certain level of skills, you need to kind of get an exposure to a system. And there may be a certain amount of that which is to remove yourself. But that ultimately the goal is to get beyond that surrender and to bring all of yourself into the study and to dafka, to argue and to engage and figure out how to push the system forward in a way that's productive and meaningful and honest.
A couple of final questions. People need to understand a God that allows pain and suffering. How do you make sense of human pain? And personally, how do you manage to comfort and console people who suffered loss, as in your old role as a pastor?
Right. So at some level, I've lived a very blessed life. My parents are still alive. I was blessed to know one of my grandmothers lived to over the age of 100, who she knew her great-grandchildren. I feel in many ways I have 4, Baruch Hashem, healthy kids and an amazing wife. I feel like I'm doing my dream job. So in many ways, I feel like I've lived a deeply blessed life. And so I feel like I've never really experienced personally the kind of deep loss that my wife, who lost her mom at too young of an age, has herself experienced. And at the same time, I find Shiva houses to be one of the greatest privileges of the rabbinate. To be able to sit with people at times of loss is powerful.
Right.
Correct.
Better to go to a shiva than to a party.
There's truth to
Not
Kohelet.
only for Rabbi.
There's truth to Kohelet. And there's a kind of an openness and an availability to the human soul that's there in a time of loss.
And everybody will remember you. Yeah.
It's true. I think that part of what people need, and perhaps the most important job of the rabbi, is to show up and to listen. And try not to talk so much. There's a tradition there's a halacha that at a shiva house you're supposed to wait for the avel to speak first. People, when they show up in shiva houses, they like to chit-chat. Wow. And I think there's a nervousness. That nervousness can get us in trouble.
Yeah, but how do you deal with a God that allows a child to lose a parent to lose a child, people to lose and lose and lose and lose, and pain? It's not like people said 6 million perished in the Holocaust. It's too overwhelming question. I want to ask about one person. How can God live with the pain of one person? He's a Avinu. You know, how can a father allow his children to suffer, especially when he's omnipotent and can do anything? I know about the free will, and I know all of that. How do you personally deal with that?
So I think that the way I imagine it is that God suffers as well. God suffers when human beings suffer. God suffers when human beings die, when children are lost, where parents are lost too young. And that at some level, when we say Hamakom Yenachem, we're saying that God should comfort the mourner, but we're also trying to imagine a way that we can comfort God. And there's a deep pathos there that goes in both directions in the language of Rabbi Heschel. It's not just God in search of man. It's not just man in search of God, but also God in search of man. And that there's a two-way street.
But he can change it. He can.
So what does that mean? Does it mean that God is not omnipotent? God is not fully powerful? I don't know.
I'm asking actually a more advanced question in my mind. People always say there are reasons why things are allowed to happen. And I'm saying even with reasons, like you will teach your child a lesson, but if he's going to run off the sidewalk, you're not going to say, well, let him learn that if the bus hits him, his brothers will see that it's not good to run into the street. You're going to grab him and protect him.
So I think, maybe the deeper question is, why doesn't God apparently any longer engage in history in the way in which God engaged in history in the biblical period or even in the rabbinic period?
Visible miracles.
There are no more visible miracles. God didn't come down and stop the Holocaust.
But even in hidden miracles, let's say that you were meant to hit the bus, or bus hit you, but he pulled you. You don't need to know why.
You don't need to know. So it seems like that doesn't happen anymore. If it ever happened, then it's hard to know.
Maybe it happens. We say that when you took a road and you missed the turn, you say, it's good, because if I did it, there would have been an accident.
Something would have happened. I got on another plane that wasn't going to...
Right.
So I think that part of it is about human free will. God lets us have choices, and
so that's okay with you. You live with that.
Free will works for me.
You works with that.
Human free will makes sense to me.
And about the Olam Haba and Tikkun Olam and all that jazz, Tchiyat HaMetim, all of that esoteric side.
What I often joke about is that I don't paskin Olam Haba. I paskin when people ask me.
Wonderful. So last thing that I do in these conversations is ask the rabbis I interview to sing a song or zmira that is meaningful to you, maybe from Ramah or Bet Abba, Bet Saba, or Bet Savta.
So there's a tune that I don't have a good enough voice, but the words are V'zakeni legadel banim u'vnei banim anshei emet. So we're coming up to my third son's bar mitzvah. Each one of my sons has a song that we sang when my wife was pregnant that became their song. And my third son's song is Shlomo's Barcheinu Avinu. Barcheinu Avinu kulanu keyachad. Kulahanu keyachad beor panecha. So that notion of God blessing us, Kulanu ke'achad, as one people, that to me is a deep hope and prayer. That we can feel not only the blessing coming, but that it Barcheinu Avinu Kulanu ke'achad, as though we could actually be one people.
Jews as one people.
Halavai.
Let's argue about this.
Amen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Such a pleasure.
Such a pleasure.